Welcome. We are continuing our exploration of the 7 domains of exploring. I'm Dr. Kirtly Jones from Obstetrics and Gynecology at University of Utah Health, and we have been talking about how exploring and the drive to explore enhances our lives, our physical health, our mental health, and our spiritual health. Today, we're going to talk about the intellectual domain of exploring. Are you a neophobe? Neophobe? Like phobic, don't really like new things or exploring? Are you a neophile? You really do seek out new worlds and boldly go where no one's gone before? Or are you a neophiliac? Well, I'm not sure that's a real word, but it means your exploring might be going a little bit too far. So with me is intrepid explorer Katie Ward. She has a doctorate in nursing practice and a clinical practice in women's health. She's a certified midlife women's health practitioner and is an anthropologist and a world explorer. So Katie, when was the first time you knew you were an explorer?
An explorer or a neophiliac?
Well, I'm just going to let you decide about whether neophiliac actually is the description of your exploring needs, desires, impulsive nature.
Put a pin in that and see by the time we get to the end of the episode. So when did I first know I was an explorer? I mean, it's funny now. I think back and if I think back about myself as a child, I was doing this as a child, right? I was told that the place I could ride my tricycle was to the corner, but I remember riding around the corner.
To boldly go.
But I think in thinking about like things that really changed how I feel, I actually have a fairly vivid memory of being in college and just hearing the book title, The Selfish Gene. So I had grown up in a really religious household at the height of the 70s evangelical movement, and my family was really sort of steeped in that world, and my exposure to things outside of that had been pretty limited until college. And so I just heard that book title, and it was a revelation. It was a life-changing concept. I didn't read the book until much later, but those 3 little words changed my entire worldview. It made me really curious for more information, and I started gobbling up books and articles about what we used to call sociobiology. It was a book titled by E.O. Wilson, and it started me on a lifelong quest it's what led me back to school in my 50s to study anthropology. So, I do remember how it made me feel. It made me feel really excited for a whole lot of new information.
I think for me, it's when I've read something that made me feel much bigger, made the world that I lived in all of a sudden explode into something that was 10 times bigger or 1,000 times bigger or an infinity. And when that happens, your chest gets bigger and your heart feels big, and it's an amazing experience to have a new thought that takes you on a new journey. And, we've talked about the fact in another 7 domains about the fact that humans are hardwired for exploring, and we've been doing it since we could stand up and walk in an energy efficient way. We are hardwired to explore. We took off and we never looked back. And psychologists have a deep interest in novelty seeking. They have many questionnaires that try to figure and measure the degree of novelty seeking and associations with other behaviors. And it is a trait that can lead to trouble. Short bursts of interest, ADD, ADHD, experimenting with drugs and alcohol, and the high that they offer, and gambling, compulsive spending, getting in trouble. It isn't always a good thing, this novelty seeking, and men tend to score more highly on novelty seeking behaviors and drives than women, and younger people more than older people. It could be a genetic thing. It could be a cultural thing. It could be a hormone thing. And Katie, you are an anthropologist, adventurer, explorer. This is up your alley. Where does the novelty exploring gene come from?
That, and it is a bit about the stuff that I study. So forgive me if I go way off on a nerd tangent here. But So, I mean, I think, it's probably all of those things. There's some genes, some culture, and perhaps some hormones. But before, I nerd out on the hormones too much, I think it's important to understand that individual differences between people is always greater than gender differences. So we can, kind of overlap two big bell curves and say, males fall on this side and females on the other. But individual differences are the spread of those bell curves overlaps a lot. So I don't want to, pigeonhole anybody into one risk category more than another.
Most of us don't have tons of kids, but for people who did have tons of kids and have 2 or 3 or 4 boys or girls, they find that among their own boys who have the same sort of genetic makeup, not exactly, but they grew in the same household, in the same culture, birth order does make a difference, but they have some wildly exploring, or deeply exploring kid and somebody who's just like a homebody and who's a neophobe.
Right. I see this in my own family. Some 2 boys and they're very different in the kinds of things that they enjoy. So yeah. So I think that's important there. It's just this is a complicated thing that you can't, completely paint with a broad stroke. That said, testosterone might influence risk-taking. Risk-taking, I think, is maybe a little different than novelty-seeking. So I think historically males maybe take a little bit more risk in terms of showing off. And there's some evolutionary ideas about, their need to take risks in order to obtain rewards, especially when it comes to finding a mate. So there's a lot of interesting research and speculation about, why that's different for males and females. But I think women take other kinds of risks that might be emotional or that have to do with their relationships. And I don't know that we've quite figured out exactly how to measure this in the way that gets us to one specific answer. I think we also socialize genders differently. So how we socialize kids may influence their access to novel environments. So it may be that we socialize boys and give them more opportunities to do things, that lead to novel environments. So I think it's important to distinguish between novelty seeking, which I think generally is something that leads to positive outcomes, and getting into trouble or addiction, where you've kind of changed what we call the hedonic set point, the point at which you feel, you're achieving happiness. And in addiction, the thing that happens really is that hedonic set point gets set higher, and you have to, sort of use your whatever the substances we mentioned, alcohol or gambling or things, more and more to get to the same experience you used to. And so I think of novelty seeking as, a thing where the journey is the destination. The seeking is its own reward, where, addiction and getting into trouble is more of a maladaptive response to a more modern stimulus that just completely hijacks that neural reward system.
Right. And so when we get back to exploring, which has curiosity or novelty seeking as part of it, we know from interviews of thousands of people, mostly European, that exploring is a crucial predictor of well-being. And it's the kind of exploring that predicts cognitive health and well-being into old age, and the kind of exploring that is a powerful driver for innovation and exploration and renewal is more than just novelty seeking. It's more than just a quick hit of the feel-good hormone dopamine. It's more than just scrolling through your news feed or social media. There are studies that look at explorers, and the best traits of novelty seeking that go along to make the explorer are those that include curiosity, and that's the novelty seeking part, persistence, and self-transcendence. And when you put those together, you get an explorer. So, we're going to be talking about that, and please check in with our other 7 domains of exploring, because we talk about that a lot because it's so much a part of the human experience and what makes us so human. There are other species. There are some world explorers, maybe orcas fall into that category, but we are way out there on the exploring domain. So some people are physical explorers. They are seeking new sensations. And some people are cognitive explorers, and they're seeking new understanding and new knowledge. And some people are both, and some adventures include physical or sensory novelty and cognitive novelty. So, Katie, you're my go-to explorer. Tell me a story. I love Katie, I love your stories. Tell me a story.
Okay, so this is a time when I combined my quest for a particular kind of sensory novelty, and I learned something, again, one of those pivotal moments in my life where I learned something that blew my mind. So I once went to Australia for a concert. So that was the sensory part. I wanted to hear.
A long way for a concert, Katie.
That is a dedicated fan.
I would tune up on Spotify myself, but that's okay.
It's a performer that I like, and I saw on social media that tickets were available, and the ticket wasn't much, so I bought the ticket because the concert was occurring at a time where I knew I could take a trip away from work, and so I just thought if I could find a deeply discounted airfare, I would go. No airfare came up, I would sell the ticket on the internet and not be out too much money. And, the stars aligned and I got a cheap airfare. And so I did this crazy trip to Australia I was gone 5 days, door to door. And I got to see the performer that I wanted to see. And I had really a day and a half around the concert to spend some time. It was my first trip to Australia. And I spent the day in a natural history museum. And so I learned some things about the Aboriginal people who, were the original owners of the land of Australia that I did not know. And so what I learned when I was in this museum was that they walked there, basically, maybe a little bit of a seafaring component to it, but they'd been on that land for more than 50,000. Some estimates are starting to say more like 65,000 years ago. Really, as soon as people were people. So you were saying, as soon as we were, upright and energetically could do this, we walked. Like folks walked from Africa through Asia down into Java and then, floated a little bit and landed in Australia. So you had very few people, kind of a small founder group there, and the seas rose, and they were cut off from the rest of the world for the next 60,000 years. And so that it sort of blew my mind. And since then, I've been back to Australia multiple times just to explore this land because that one little story ended up sparking a huge interest for me.
Well, it is transcending to understand that once they were there and they were early on as people, although we've been people as people for a very long time, they have their own worldview. There's an amazing way of looking at the world and interdigitating time and space. The concept of song lines, and when you walk through space, you walk through time. And that blew my mind. So having lived in Australia myself, that was one of those deep dives. And, well, for me, I've been an addicted reader since the time I was 5, and I read all the Nancy Drew mysteries as a preteen and on to James Bond when I was a teen, and I knew that reading mysteries and thrillers gave me a dopamine hit. I was curious, I was persistent, and reading those books took me out of the daily sense of self. I could shut out my brothers and sisters, but I became a cognitive explorer when I felt the overwhelming beauty of the natural world. And I took a deep dive into biology and evolution when I was in high school, beyond what they were teaching. And I had the support of my family. And family, for an early explorer, can be critical. Not always. There are kids that do it on their own, but I had a daddy who was invested in my becoming an explorer. And it was transcending. And I didn't have to travel to learn biology and learn about the sensory and the natural world. So back to adventures that combine sensory explorations and the cognitive. If you are fortunate, as I just mentioned, your parents planted the exploring bug through museums or books or car trips. And for those who were lucky enough to have resources or family that have the resources maybe study abroad when they were in high school, or they took a summer abroad, maybe their first dive into exploring, and maybe it didn't stick and they just, went and had beers with their friends and hung out, but maybe it was a little bug that got populated and now you want to go.
Well, I didn't have the means for study abroad as part of my early education. And my family didn't have a lot of money for vacations, but we did take some long car trips and some long train trips. So that was how my parents liked to explore the world, was they wanted to see it from a window, but not be outside in it. That was climate controlled. But I had that experience of, sort of traveling across a landscape. And so as I've, been more grown up and become an adult and my children are raised and I have a little more freedom, my favorite kind of exploring is really to be out in the world and especially walking on it. So if I had to pick one vacation, it's a long distance walk.
Oh, with someone who can teach you along the way. I like that one. Well, and for people who are older and have resources, there are learning adventures combined with travel with the organization Road Scholar. And you can get that at ROADSCHOLAR.org. And these are moderately priced trips with often active walking with learning along the way. And that can be something that people of modest income who can save can actually get there.
Yeah, and then through the University of Utah here, where our podcast is based, there's Osher Lifelong Learning. If you don't want to go on a trip, but you just are interested in taking classes, all kinds of classes that you can take, I think, for free after a certain age. Then there's another program here at the U called Go Learn. This is my plan for my own retirement is, so in Go Learn, you can sign up for a curated trip led by a university professor that has local knowledge of the place you're traveling to. So,
well, for those curious but unable to travel because of physical or financial or family constraints, there's still a whole world of cognitive exploring. You have to start with curious. Are you curious about something? Seriously curious? More than a 10-minute visit to Wikipedia, or you checked out something on Wikipedia and you want to go deeper? Okay, you're curious and so now you're showing some persistence. So you're getting there as on the Explorer badge, to get your Explorer badge. At the bottom of most Wikipedia articles are links to the sources from which the article was written. And you can take a deeper dive into the origins of the article, which is usually just a summary. And then there's this amazing institution called the library, and the heroes who know how to find out about anything, and that's the librarians. And your local library is free. And many university libraries are free to explore with the help of librarians, even if you can't check the books out unless you're a student. Your dive can go much deeper.
And museums are another amazing place. So I was telling my story earlier about killing some time at a museum in Australia that, changed my life. So that was a free or nominally priced exhibit where, I learned one thing that's then sent me back. I've gone on long vacations in Australia, spending a month traveling across the red outback Nullarbor where no trees grow, and another trip camping under the stars to see Uluru. And that was all sparked by one day at a museum.
Yeah. I think when you walk through a museum, there are these people kind of standing by, and some of them are a little more outgoing and they'll come up to you, but they usually have a tag or they have a lanyard, and they are docents. Sometimes they're volunteers, sometimes they're professionals, and the word docent or docere means to speak or to teach. And they know something deeper about that. And if you just spend a minute with the docent who happens to be standing by an exhibit or a painting, you can learn a lot. Well, do you have a deep curiosity about something or want to improve your cognitive skills so you can explore something more deeply? There are free online courses from many universities that are sorted by how much time you want to spend or how much you already know. Coursera, COURSERA.org is a great website that's sorted by topic and expertise and time. You want to learn about something in 2 hours? A shallow dive that might lead you to do a deeper dive, or courses that go up to 4 years. And the Khan Academy at KAHNacademy.org has free courses on many subjects. You can do that for free on your computer if you want to learn more about something. And you can explore the kitchen. You can explore new foods and new techniques. You don't have to go to baking school to become a master baker. And if you have the curiosity, the persistence, and the ability to think above and beyond yourself. And knitting, crafting, Katie, you do all these. I have many things that I wear in the winter that are thanks to Katie's persistence.
Yeah, I mean, and, these are all things I've taken up. They're not things I grew up doing, but I took up knitting at a particular time in life. Knitting's probably my big craft, but I have friends who, have developed incredible crafting skills in their retirement. It's never too late to take up a musical instrument. Don't ever let anybody tell you that it's too late to learn something. There are citizen science projects. You can get involved in counting birds or, collecting data about air quality. Lots of people I know have gotten into genealogy. It's a great time to think about writing, seeing the world through a different view, and taking up photography, gardening, exploration and growth like this. They're not just activities. They're a way of life.
Well, I have been much more curious about what is new in early childhood development for many reasons. And there's a lot out there for parents and grandparents if they want to know what goes on in little minds. And of course, the mother of all video libraries is the YouTube, but you have to be careful of the content because it isn't always curated and it isn't fact checked. So some are really quite, reliable. If the ones that are, let's say the ones that are linked to Nova, the PBS science videos, but some are not necessarily that science based, but you just, you got to be a little careful.
Oh man. So I've been exploring AI and virtual reality. I'm sure this is not going to surprise you. But I'm loving both of those things. And both of those were a little bit accidental, really. So I was at a library at a demonstration of virtual reality and saw an opportunity to merge what I do for a living and using virtual reality as a way to teach. So I worked with a company to develop a virtual reality trainer for my students. And now we're kind of beta testing that to see how to use it in education. But that's been a whole lot of fun, and it wasn't something I was expecting to get into at this stage in the game, but I'm really enjoying that. And then more recently, because artificial intelligence is something my students are using as a teacher, I need to figure out how to use it and, incorporate it into my learning. And it's out there. I know students are going to be taking advantage of that. And so I needed to get ahead of that. And I have to say, I've been blown away and having so much fun learning AI. So maybe that'll be an episode one of these days.
Probably so. Because how does your average, grandma incorporate AI into the roles that she plays in her family? I'm going to have to think about that because you're a grandma and I'm a grandma.
Yeah.
So can I be a better grandma with AI?
I would say to any grandma listening, if you want to come up with a new game to play with your grandkids, pop it into your whatever AI you have available to you and say, I'm looking for an idea to play with my grandkids. This one likes exploring out in the world and this one likes being inside. How do I merge that? And you might be amazed at the number of ideas that will come up.
Well, so people who created AI were bold explorers. They were curious, they were persistent, and they were self-transcendent in their focus so deep, so long to create something like that. And for those of you who will not be traveling right now or may never travel farther than your own home state, there's still a lot to learn. In your garden, in your backyard, in your neighborhood is a world of novelty and experiences. Time can slow down when you really look deeply at what's in your own domain. And there's a great quote from the poet William Blake in the poem Auguries of Innocence, and to see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. So thank you for exploring with us. If all of you are deeply diving into the 7 domains of exploring by listening to all of the 7 domains, you can get them wherever you get your podcasts at the 7 domains of women's health or at women's7, WOMENS7.com. You have curiosity, persistence, and hopefully self-transcendence. Good on ya.